Assalamu alaikum, welcome to Book Reviews. My guest today is Nazia Jalali, and I'd like to welcome you to the studio.
Walaikum salam. Thank you for having me.
Welcome. Can you tell me a little bit about you and your background?
Yes, of course. As you mentioned, I'm a children's author, and this is my debut novel, The House of Ibn Kathir, The Competition Begins. But aside of that, other than being an author, I'm a mother of three lovely children. I graduated at university in 1998. I did BA Honours in Architecture. I have the publishing house that I'm running at the moment. I'm also involved in other activities myself within the media. So, for example, I work for Islam Channel. I'm one of their presenters on Women's AM. But I've done lots of other projects with them. I've done Ramadan Bites. I did City Sisters Season 3. So I dabble in a lot of things.
Oh, I see. No, it's good. And you said you've got your own publishing house.
Yes, that's correct.
Did you publish your debut novel through
I
there?
did. I did.
Oh,
I
okay.
did do that. Yes.
Okay. What's the name of your publishing house?
It's Blackstone House.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So, do you publish books from other Muslim authors? Is that what you're
Not at the
looking
moment. At the moment, I'm just focusing on my particular books that I'm interested in writing in. But definitely, this is something that I'm quite excited about. It's unusual because this is, I've actually chosen to write for older children, older Muslim children, and it's one of those things that if you look at the moment, mashallah, especially in the last few years, we've seen a surge of talented Muslim authors, up and coming authors for particularly for the younger years, picture books, sort of early picture book stories. But there isn't actually a huge sort of amounts of books out there for the older children's category. So I'm looking at particularly key stages 2 and into key stage 3 above. So for that's the kind of interest that I have. So we're looking at independent readers, basically those children who I think it's really important for them to have their sort of needs met as well. And children, they always need to develop, they're always growing and developing. And as Muslim parents, this was one of the reasons why I started this. It actually began with my daughter when she first became an independent reader. This was it. I thought this is brilliant. I want to introduce her to the world of children's literature. So, we were getting all the books out like Mallory Towers and the Railway Children, all of the kind of classics that you expect from that particular age group. And obviously this is something that's reinforced at school as well. Children have to read widely. And it sort of occurred to me that it was around that time that I thought, okay, yes, that's great. But I would also want her, because she is a Muslim child, and I want her to develop her own identity and her own sort of, to be confident with who she is. And this is something that's already an issue within literature, the whole issue of diversity, and often that's quite lacking in books. So for me, it wasn't just simply about having characters that are diverse just for the sake of being diverse. I wanted something that was going to have Muslim characters that children could relate to, but the storyline itself would pass a lot of Islamic knowledge to children so that they begin to understand who they are, they relate to those characters, they relate to and have confidence with who they are as Muslim children, because they will see things or read things within the narrative that they can relate to, they understand, this is like my household, or this is some of the things that I experience with my friends. And so for me, that was very important to have that come through within the story. And that is the kind of story I was looking for my own daughter. So just thought I'd pen it myself.
Yes, no, that's really good. It's really interesting to hear, because I think the ethnic minority, they're really lacking in the publishing industry, and also to read books religiously, sort of where we can compare our lives.
That's right.
And I think that is really important for children as well. I mean, we encourage all our children to read. It is very important.
It's very
to read.
important,
Yes.
Exactly. It's the building blocks to anything that we do related to education, understanding, having empathy, understanding the world you live into, who you are. So that's a very important aspect. So for me, it's something that it's a valuable source for educating a child. So this is my contribution towards that.
That's great.
Inshallah.
So that's fantastic. And how did you actually come about with this story? Was it through personal experience, or
there is a lot of, there's a lot of personal experience within this, from the point of view that the characters in here the places that you hear about, read about. I mean, I myself, I personally, I was born in London, but I grew up in Wales. So much of the story mentions places that I visited. Much of my experiences, even down to my first field trip, school trips,
yes.
that's sort of like mentioned within the narrative as well. But obviously the story is completely Yusuf's story.
Yes.
It is his experience.
Yes.
It's a boarding school. It's an Islamic boarding school, and you know, he's sent away to this school by his parents because they want the best for him in terms of just secular education as well as his religious education. So he's not quite convinced, although on one hand he wants to go, on the other hand, obviously it's a big step just to have to go to a boarding school.
Yes.
So he goes there, he will have his adventures, a couple of mishaps, mysterious things, and I think what I really wanted to do was, and I think that's really distinctive about my book, it is a traditional adventure fiction that you would expect from mainstream books, but it has that twist to it where there is Islamic knowledge in there that children will benefit from. So for example, I remember at the time my daughter at school, she was learning a lot of things, not just within just broad curriculum, obviously within the core subjects, but she was getting introduction to history. She was learning about historical figures and things like that. And I was sitting there thinking at the time that, you know, that's very good. It's important for us to understand history because we know where we come from. But it's for us, we have an entire heritage ourselves as Muslims. So it's really important for her to know about the historical figures in Islam. So that's why the title Ibn Kathir. He's one of the greatest, one of the greatest scholars in that we know of in Islam. And so basically, I constructed the school so that in schools you do have a house system. And within the house systems, there are 4 houses in this particular school, and each house is named after a particular scholar. So you've got House of Ibn Kathir, you've got the House of Ibn Majah, you've got the House of Ibn Abjarum, and you've got the House of Abu Hanifa. And through this whole kind of intriguing way, they learn about the historical figures of our past. They learn about famous stories that took place, famous events, but it's done so naturally within the narrative. So for me, it was very important that it wasn't so heavily preachy, but at the same time, it fulfilled the need for a child to have the desire to read an adventure, but interwoven within the narrative is valuable information.
Yes.
Like within the course of the book, the children will learn about 70 Arabic words, and there's a glossary of terms at the back of the book as well. So it's quite comprehensive in the sense that there's a lot of things they learn from this, as well as just have fun when they're reading, and also as a piece of English literature as well. This was the other thing that I've put a lot of effort into producing something that would be well written for them to benefit on so many levels. So it is the language features are there, the depth of the descriptions, all of the things that you would expect from the mainstream books. It's all encapsulated within the book. So they, inshallah, should benefit from more aspects than one.
Great. No, that's really interesting, and it's always important to have that balance and not be too preachy.
Exactly,
and then again,
it's quite hard.
Have the story and have an adventure. No, I think that's great. And what kind of feedback have you had from people who have read your stories, particularly children?
Particularly children. I mean, generally speaking, I mean, I've had lots of reviews done through magazines and media. But for me, I think the best reviews are the ones that children give. Because for me, they ultimately, I wrote it for them. And when I get feedback, like for example, when I've had people say to me that their children, normally they can't even get their children to read, but this was a book that they actually just picked up, they loved, they were between homeworks, trying to sneak away to read the book. Some of the children were going to bed early just so that they could read the book, which
fantastic.
Is just, it's the best compliment that you can get.
Mashallah.
I had another child, which I just thought was so funny. They read the book and at the end of it asked their mum if they could go to an Islamic boarding school.
Oh, really?
So
wonderful.
It's just lovely. I mean, in terms of, the reviews have just been really heartwarming. And for me as a writer, I mean, obviously that's the biggest relief really, is because when you're writing at the time, you never know quite, whether they're going to understand the story, whether you've done justice to what you hoped you wanted to do. So, when you get the reviews, alhamdulillah, it's a relief. and it's something it's a joy to hear.
Okay. So do you have a favourite author, someone who's inspired you perhaps in your writing?
For me personally, the books that I've enjoyed always are the classics. So my personal favorite would be Jane Austen, of course. But in terms of children's literature, I mean, and young adult literature, there's lots. I mean, I like William Golding's Lord of the Flies. I think it's a brilliant book, beautifully written. I like Teresa Breslin. It was one of her books that I read was The Prisoner of the Inquisition. So it's quite a wide range. But for me, when I look for literature, I look particularly, I think I do tend to get drawn to the more classics and also the very maybe not so contemporary stories, but purely because they're so well written and the narratives are just so, the stories are fantastic. Really, I just find them very interesting.
That's
I tend
great.
to be, I'm not so inclined towards the contemporary kind of stories.
Sure,
So,
no,
historical fictions, anything like that.
Yes.
That's me.
Okay, no, that's good, and I think that's where you can get your ideas from. You have to read,
Yes,
to be able to write.
absolutely.
Further. So, do you have any more books coming out, or are you
I'm
writing
working
anything
on the
else?
sequel now. So
Okay, that's good.
as soon as I wrote the first one, then the demand came for what happens
Of
in the
course.
second year of his, well, rather year 8 of his high school. So
I mean, how long did it take you to write your first book?
this actually did take 5 years.
Oh, really? That
took a long
long?
time, but only purely because as I said, because I didn't want to make it so preachy. You know, trying to find the balance between being able to
Yes,
write a
yes.
narrative and then putting all that information in there without it being so heavy. It's quite hard, and it took me some time to sort of get the balance, to sort of get used to that. But then as the chapter started to evolve, the more I did, the more easier it became. But there was that initial stages. I mean, most writers experience that, I think, initially when you're sitting down with the ideas. The hardest, I think, is when you're trying to do the first half. But once you're on a roll and you kind of get the feel and the direction that you're going in,
it all flows very naturally.
Starts to flow.
Yes,
so I think for me, it was just getting started that took some time. So I had many draft versions of the first.
I mean, no one ever writes
no
a
one
book
without exactly.
Lots of
So for me, it was a learning
good.
curve. It was a huge learning curve for this one, particularly.
And your next book, every time you write something
it gets
new,
easier,
always,
inshallah.
Yes, no, I hope so. And do you have advice for any one of the published authors out there?
I think
Your
that
top tip.
Tip would be you've got to have patience.
Absolutely,
you've got to really. You've got to focus on the craft itself, getting that right, because I think especially in the kind of in this industry, there's this rush to push things out very quickly, and I think if you do that, then you can compromise on the actual quality of what you're trying to produce. So you've got to have patience. I think it's something that you have to give a lot of attention to and thought about it, and hopefully, inshallah, if you have that, then and perseverance along with it, then you can do it. It's just it's a whole load of experiences that come with this.
Absolutely.
And just enjoy the process and really be clear about your intentions are as well. Because when you have that clear as well, that really makes it happen for you in the best possible way as well. So
I think that's very well said. Patience, persistence, and perseverance. They're the 3 Ps that I always tell everybody, and I think it's really
across the
important.
board in anything you do. I think.
I mean, people these days want things to happen yesterday.
I know,
but
it's this kind of lifestyle we live. Everything now, this minute, and I think the best things do come when you actually take your time with it. So.
Absolutely, no, that's good. And what do you do in your spare time? What kind of
My
hobbies
spare
do you like?
time, well, I have to say I do have very little spare time now, but when I do, I would love to do art. I obviously I have that history with architecture, so for me, I would just love to be able to get my oil paints out and just do my artwork. And for me, that's one of my kind of, if I want to de-stress, that would be the kind of thing I would do. I like going places, visiting places, museums, like everyone else. I'm just pretty,
Arty.
Yes.
No, I think that's great. It's fantastic. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to come and talk to me. And can you please just read a short extract from your book?
Of course.
That'd be nice to hear.
This is taken from chapter 12. It's called Sabotage. And basically my character, Yusuf, is now for the first time, he's been having lessons in archery, which is one of the main sports at the school. So now he's going to have his first competition. So, sabotage. Clear, shouted Ustad Hamza. The first whistle blew. Yusuf's heart was thumping wildly. He slowly drew his arrow back and felt it gently nudge the side of his nose. He pursed his lips as the bowstring lightly pressed against them. The fingers of his left hand were sticky from sweat, but securely gripped his recurve bow. Closing his left eye, he focused straight ahead upon his target, just as Ustad Hamza had taught him. Yusuf whispered the basmala under his breath as he paused in anticipation. A few seconds later, the second whistle blew. "Fire!" yelled Ustad Hamza at the top of his voice. In an instant, Yusuf's eyes closed. His fingers relaxed around the arrow as it sped away from his grip. He opened his eyes again, his breath held between his lips. He watched anxiously as his arrow tore through the air. Its red tail feathers, the colours of Ibn Kathir, danced and twisted in the breeze. Yusuf was not alone. Eager eyes looked on as the boys of Year 7 stood motionless in one regimental line across the freshly cut lawn. It was a warm and sunny day for April. Not a sound could be heard, except for the whistle of the arrows cutting through the air. The whistle was closely followed by the whipping sound of the iron arrowheads as they pierced through the woven straw surface of their targets. After a few seconds, a third and final whistle blew. "Retrieve!" shouted Ustad Hamza, after checking that all the arrows had been fired. "And for those of you who have just fired your first arrow, Mabruk, you fulfilled the sunnah of the Prophet, peace be upon him." A murmur of excitement broke out with this announcement. Ustad Hamza paused as he smiled and looked along the row of boys before him.
Thank you. That was beautifully read, and it's a lovely story. So
Just
thank you very much.
Thank you.
And do you have a website where you like to tell our viewers where they might be able to get a copy of your book from?
Yes, the website is www.ibnkathir.co.uk. You can also find the book details on Facebook, Instagram. So inshallah, yeah, just Google up the House of Ibn Kathir.
I don't think it'll be hard to find. No,
it'll be there.
Thank you. Thank you so much for coming along.
Thank you very much for having me.
I'd like to end the show with a quote. "There's no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you." And that was written by Mary Angelou. So thank you for watching. Until next time, goodbye.